Thank you to the organizers for the invitation to this very beautiful event, which I have learned already a lot from. In my presentation, I'm going to put the focus a little bit on a different aspect. I'm not looking so much on the question of intelligent machines, whether they're intelligent and which way they are, but rather on the aspect of living amongst machines, as the title of this conference is. And I'm interested in the transformation of the social relations we have with the emergence of algorithmic practices and also machine learning practices. And my example will be financial markets. I've studied financial markets and the transformation of financial markets in the last year, specifically algorithmic trading, high-frequency algorithmic trading. And in order to do that, I will have to do a little detour. I will go through a little historical discourse, the changes of social relations in financial markets in the history, and then I will talk about the practices of high-frequency traders in current situation of the financial markets. I will start with something else, with a public discourse that you're probably very familiar with if you're interested in that topic. That is the topic of automation and the idea that the automation will either relieve us of some jobs in a good way, so we don't need to clean the floor, for instance, but it also will steal our jobs. So this is a very dominant discourse that we had, especially in 2017. You're probably all familiar with these numbers. There will be a lot of important jobs, whether they are bus drivers, truck drivers, whether they are in the service industry, or whether they are journalists or even translators. These jobs will all go to automated machines and practices. And the interesting thing with this, if you follow this discourse, the public discourse, is that it changed a little bit in 2018. Very representative for this is a tweet by Elon Musk from Tesla, who just in April 2018 tweeted this. Yes, excessive automation at Tesla was a mistake. To be precise, my mistake, humans are underrated. So this is a very interesting quote because it shows you to which extent the process of automating, the automating industry actually relies pretty much on humans, much more than the public discourse actually suggests. And following this, there was several articles and interviews. One expert on automated manufacturing said in the New York Times the following: the highest volume plants often have more assembly workers and fewer robots. It's a little counterintuitive, but that's how it is. So this shows you that there's a certain counterintuitive empirical evidence to what this public discourse tells us, that the future of us will be a clear separation between machines, robots, and us. And these hint at something that I want to actually focus on in this talk, is that the focus will be probably not so much a separation, but rather the more interesting focus in the future will be the intensification between humans and machines. So following this, this evidence that I just showed you, that there will be, that there's a certain kind of, even in car factoring, a higher cooperation between the humans and robots. This is also very obvious in studies, people who studied automated industrial automation. For instance, Lissane Bainbridge said, the increased interest in human factors among engineers reflects the irony that the more advanced a control system is, so the more crucial may be the contribution of the human operator. So this is basically the paradox that this previous quote, this expert in the auto industry was already talking about. This text is called Ironies of Automation and shows exactly that. The more automated the process is, the more you actually rely on human beings, the more intense is actually their involvement and not the way around. And the irony of this text, Ironies of Automation, is that it was not published consecutively to the tweet of Elon Musk or this article in the New York Times, but actually already was published in 1981. So it's basically a text, Ironies of Automation, that is already like 30, 40 years old. To conclude this little introduction is, what I wanted to say is that the problem is that this separation discourse is not only empirically wrong, but it's actually problematic in many ways because it makes us oblivious or makes us oblivious to the new emerging forms that show up between, in the relations between humans and machines, the transformation of the human, the transformation of social relations in the algorithmic age. And that the more interesting process is actually not the question whether or not a machine can drive, a car can drive entirely by itself, which it can't, but rather what kind of function do we expect from the human to contribute, or recently also a process, how do we actually alter and change the infrastructure to make this car drive by itself. So there are two transformations that are very, very interesting than the intelligent entity by itself, the change of the human as a proxy between the system and the environment, and the remodeling of the environment itself. And I, again, will show you this on in the financial markets, and I will do so by a little, very brief historical sketch, which is necessary in order to show you how the change of the financial markets also introduced technology and up to the process of automation in 1989. I will go through this very quickly, and the whole idea behind this is to show you how these social transformations actually changed in the process of automating the stock market. These four numbers are rather heuristic. 1602, the invention of the stock market exchange in Amsterdam. First option market in the world. 1867, the invention of the stock market ticker, ticker tape, that makes it possible to transmit information from the stock market outside the stock market, across the street, across the ocean, so you can actually read it, and then you don't need to be on the floor. In 1961, the invention of electronic trading, which also enabled actually to now trade. You don't just receive the information from the market, but you can actually trade on the market yourself. And in 1989, the invention of automated trading, which made it possible for the computer to take over the allocation of information, the decision-making, and also the execution of transactions itself. And all these are accompanied by changes of social relations and technological intermediaries. The first one is the pretty obvious one, 1607. That's what we know from the TV, the floor trading. It's called open outcry market. It shows you, that it's a very face-to-face social activity. It has to do with people talking to each other, screaming at each other, making symbolic gestures. It's very intersubject, face-to-face, interpersonal, and it has very minimal technical intermediaries. You have maybe some spreadsheets, maybe some contracts, printed papers, bonds, but it's, I guess it's pretty obvious the point that I'm trying to make here, that it's a very intersubjective face-to-face process. And then, as I said, the invention of the stock market ticker, the ticker tape, is a very first qualitatively shift in the financial markets insofar as we have the first face-to-device relation. The stock market ticker made it possible to look at the stock market information outside the stock market, and but then you still had to phone your broker, who would then actually initiate the trade. You could only just receive information from the market, and the technical intermediary here is the ticker tape. And I can also only very briefly mention this. It is historically very interesting because it created a certain kind of what they called back then a ticker fever, meaning the device itself created so much attraction that people actually started to stop focusing on the actual trades, because the device is very interesting, makes a very loud ticking noise, it is under a glass bowl, has a continuous stream of information coming out of the ticker tape, so people started staring at it and spending time just admiring the machine. And that was called back then the ticker fever, which is a pathological phenomenon. So you can already see that the social relation to the market changed. It's not anymore face-to-face, but it starts to be objective. One starts to perceive the market as something that happens on the tape. And the next step is then the electronic stock market trading. Here the emphasis is on manual trading. So you sit in front of your screen, but you still have to do the trading yourself. It's point and click. You put in numbers. You actually have to initiate trades yourself. You might have like Excel spreadsheets that also contain algorithms that will tell you maybe which kind of trade is preferable to others, but it's still something that you need to initiate and act yourself. And here the change is similar to the tape, to the ticker tape, that the relation is actually also inter-objective. Another sociologist, Karin Knotzetina, has called this synthetic relationship, and the point is here that if you look on these, if these traders look at their screens or monitors and trade, they don't actually imagine a person behind it. They don't think, if I see a number, that's actually a person. It's not a mediated face-to-face interaction, but it's actually the market is on the screen, or the screen is the market, right? So it's a synthetic relation insofar as it is inter-objective and insofar as it is face to screen, and there are certain kind of practices involved. People need to get into the mood, need to settle down, need to get on a seat, and then they need to focus on the screens, pay very intense attention to what's happening on the screen on the different windows. They might have some brief interactions with their colleagues across the room, and they might actually take up the phone and call people. But it's a very intense activity happening related to the screen. So far, so traditional, and now we are moving into automated stock trading. And here my claim is that we have now yet another change in the social relations that is actually far exceeding what we have seen in manual trading, that is called synthetic by Karin Knotzetina. I call these symbiotic, and I call them symbiotic because it's not just happening on the visual level, but it's happening on more intense levels. It has to do with acoustics, with soundscapes, it has to do with certain kind of bodily disciplines. But before I go into that, I will just briefly tell you what the algorithm does in algorithmic trading and what the human does in algorithmic trading, so you get a quick idea what is behind. The algorithm will pull the information from the stock market through data feeds, formatted data, algorithm ready, can be pulled, can be calculated. If you have some sort of machine learning, then there will be also some sort of pattern recognition going on. That's just recently been applied, not so much by high-frequency traders, maybe by low-frequency traders that will use machine learning processes to recognize pattern in the trading graphs, find out correlations that have not been discovered by humans before, and so on and so forth. And it will also make a decision what to trade, and then it will actually execute that trade. And famously, high-frequency traders try to do that very fast. It's not very complicated. What they do is it'll dump, but it's as fast as possible in order to outrun the competitors. If you have more a slow algorithmic or low-frequency trader, these people will more try to pay emphasis on more smart systems and might not be that fast, right? And the human is known to be sitting there only as surveying the system in the public discourse, not doing much, maybe sipping martinis and then pushing the emergency button in case something goes wrong. And that's actually not the case at all in many cases. It's actually way more complicated. There's a very intense process of being immersed in the lurking process. These people cannot let their eyes off the screen for a second. They have different shifts of people coming in when they go to the toilet, or when somebody needs to go somewhere else, or when they have a lunch break. So there's a consistent attention paid to what's going on the screen. And that for various reasons. One of the main arguments I always make with algorithm systems, they are various limited smart systems, and they have a very specific environment in which they are working. They're not generalizers, they're very specific, and the person in front of the screen has to know very precisely in which environment that algorithm works and in which environment it doesn't work, right? So in normal trading markets or market situations, the algorithmic system will be just doing fine, but let's say Vladimir Putin announces to invade the Crimea, or somebody, Trump, announce a trading ban with some country, then the algorithm, of course, has no idea about that, right? So you can incorporate in the algorithmic systems, for instance, the annotation of labor data, unemployment data, and all that. But if, for instance, like in 2015, that labor data is delayed by 15 seconds, then somebody needs to tell the algorithm system that that is 15 seconds later and that the market has not priced in the labor data at this specific time. So what I'm trying to say here, it's a very specific system. And even if it's machine learning and intelligent and all that, it operates in a very tiny niche of its environment. And the human, so to speak, works as a proxy, as a translator between the environment and the system, and needs to make sure that this system is actually, doing fine. And if the environment changes, then somebody has to adjust parameters, has to maybe slow it down, has to take some of the algorithms off, because again, the algorithmic system doesn't just consist of one algorithm, but of hundreds or thousands of them. So some of them can be pulled down, can be initiated, and so on and so forth. And if things go really haywire, then they will also, of course, as they call, land the algorithmic system and turn it down. But that's actually not happening very often. So in order to do all that, in order to pay so much attention, be so connected to the algorithmic systems, you need a very intense channels of information. And my observation is that that's not just happening through symbolic information looking at the screens like manual traders, but they actually have additional layers of information, such as acoustic soundscapes that will tell them what happens in the background. So if you go to some of these high-frequency traders, it's very loud. It's not as quiet as you expect. It's not just the humming of some computer fans and people whispering, but it's actually very super loud because the atmosphere, there are some soundscapes, and there will also be signal noises. They will inform the traders about the system of the situation of the condition of the system. And the idea is, if you have 10, 12 monitors and each of them contains 10, 12 windows, you have a certain regime of intention that you follow. You look on this screen first, you look on this screen first, then you go down, and then you go down. So it can take a while until you actually reach to the other side again. And these signals can actually inform you about something happening very important here when your attention of your eyes is on the other side. So these have an additional layer of information, and they also inform the people who are not trading in front of the monitors, who are, for instance, just the CEOs or like the head of the trading desk who is actually sitting, has his office next to it. They will get this general idea about the system of the trade and about how busy it is. I, of course, I was not allowed to take videos or anything, but I can give you a little idea of the soundscape. I hope that works here. I will stop this. This is just a still picture, because I was not allowed to take videos. This is a still picture, and I've layered over the audio of how that sounds if you go in there, right? So I explained a little bit what the reasoning behind these sounds is, but that's how it would sound, and I hope it's loud enough to be... well, that did not work. All right.
It's profitable to actively monitor us, but sometimes sometimes it's not. This is profitable to my opponent. So this was huge rate.
So, contrary to what we usually think, high-frequency traders are all quiet. It's actually not. It sounds like this. You come in and it's very loud. And at one point, you can actually even hear the person say, this was a huge trade. So you could identify by the sound, by one of the bullhorns, that it was actually a very loud, very intense trade. And he can identify all this by these sounds, and it also helps the head of trade, who's not sitting in front of the screen, to know what's going on, or maybe to get an idea what the system just did at this particular point. And these are just very common sounds that you can download by internet. The company I was, they had animal sounds before, and then the traders, they would complain that it feel like they're being in a zoo because there was just cows, and so they were insisting on changing it to a more industrial setting, and then you have all these bullhorns and car humps, and they are just individually assigned to specific kind of events happening in the market. And as I said, that helps them to, as I said before, connect to the state of the machine. There are also some sort of corporal practices, forms of disciplines that I cannot go into, because you also have to be, of course, very disciplined and sitting in front of the screen and not moving, and especially a lot of older traders who used to be on the trading floor are not very happy with having to sit and stare at screens all day long. So, of course, but that's probably a problem that a lot of these activities that have to do with sitting are sharing with other activities. Yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to say in this presentation. The runaway is that I was trying to show what's more interesting is probably in the process of automation and in the process of introducing machine learning processes is rather to look at the transformation of what it does to humans, to the social relations we have, and also to the change of the environments that we're going to see, especially in self-driving cars. The more interesting developments right now are actually not the cars themselves, but how countries starting to remodel the infrastructure. So you basically flat everything with sensors. And I think that's actually from a sociological perspective, a way more worrying aspect, remodeling the whole infrastructure than whether the question whether or not it's intelligent or not. And it's the same, it's in a very similar way that you can look at the activities of humans who are being like disciplined in a certain way to behave in a certain way, to pay attention to a certain way. If you look at these traders within their shifts, within their 6 or 7 hours, they are completely, as you can say, in a state of transgression. I mean, you have to be completely immersed in that process. You cannot think about whether or not what you're doing is good or bad, right? It's just something that is a state of immersion, and that seems to be, ironically, more intense the more automated the project or the process itself is. Yeah, that would be my presentation. Thank you for attention.
So, is there a short question from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, and it's very interesting that you put this direction, focus away from the machine to the human. Did you have a look into about the implications of the human action that I would assume is pretty well connected to the intense focus they have on their work? What a click would mean for them, wrong click or a proper click, and as you said, a good trade or something like that, in terms of maybe thousands or 10,000s of euros?
Yeah, there are very many examples. One of the famous algorithmic trading, high-frequency trading, is Night Capital, where some technicians accidentally initiated an experimental algorithm into the markets, and then that company assumed losses by some millions within 45 minutes and then went bankrupt. So some technician initiated the wrong algorithm accidentally, and that basically busted the company within 45 minutes, right? So and also with the other example is in this company that I went to, I was talking to the head of trade, and then he was hearing some of these signals, and that meant something to him. So he was storming out, looking at the monitor and looked what was controlling what just happened. So this process of like the human involvement also, of course, has some implications of making mistakes or trying to avoid mistakes. It goes in both ways insofar as other incidents like the flash crash, right, needs humans to actually pull down the system really quick. But it can also, at the same time, as an example of Night Capital, lead to the completely obliteration of the company, right? I don't know if that answered.
Thank you so much for offering us a glimpse into this amazing sensory environment that high-frequency trading is nowadays, and that probably nobody really knows about who doesn't work in such an environment. I think it would be really interesting to analyze it with, I don't know, affect theory, or maybe even Erika Fischer-Lichte's methodology of bodily experience in performative environments. And I think I just quickly wanted to ask the question, those audio signals, they are symbolic in a way too. How are they more than just symbolic? Because you said it's symbiotic. I mean, just because it's not a visual signal, it doesn't mean that it's more than symbolic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. Your first question gives me the possibility of a very shameless plug. But come back to your question, it's not just, what I'm trying to say in this article, it's not just symbolic in a way that, as we have seen in the case with the stock market ticker, there's a sense of like attraction, effective attraction to the device that exceeds the information. Especially the point of the ticker fever showed that the information, the functionality of the system actually took a back seat. So they started to being so immersed in the system that it actually wasn't really functional anymore. And what I'm trying to show in this article is that it's really just an effective immersion into the system. That some of this works actually to make possible that the whole body actually kind of like merges with the system in a very intense way. So it's, of course, it has a functional sense. People should trade as intense, as efficient as possible. But the way of including and immersing the subject is actually not symbolic. It works on a very effective level. It works acoustic. It works in a very visual sense, but it also works in a practical and sometimes even in a very corporal, pharmacopoeial sense. I cannot talk about this, but there's also a very interesting fact that these people take if they take performance enhancers or drugs, it's not the cocaine and the alcohol of the floor traders, but it's a very different type of drug. And you can see that this enacts certain kind of like bodily capability that are necessary, that might not be necessary on the trading floor. There's always the example, one of the former floor trader always told me, I used to be on the trading floor and we would get completely drunk the night before and then we would trade. But the adrenaline on the trading floor, screaming and jumping around, the adrenaline basically gets you sober real fast, right? But if you have to do the same thing in front of a screen, if you're completely hangover and you have to look at numbers, nothing is worse than that, right? So it also disciplines the body in a way of behaving yourself, of, putting a health regime on you that is very different to what people would do who are actually in open outcry markets.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions.